tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I'm currently studying child and youth care at Sheridan College. I do art, so I tend to do like digital art and like crafting, and I also I tend to be like very empathetic towards people. Like I tend to uh, really I like getting along with people.
That's good. Okay, so like, what do you know about our agency or program?
So what I know about Vibe Arts is the mission goal is to go into underdeveloped communities and bring artistic expression to help make leadership, resilience, and accessibility for kids so they can have those skills to create a leadership for themselves.
Okay, so what are some of Sheridan requirements for your practical placement?
So Sheridan has 5 requirements. One is every week we get 30 minutes of supervision. The second is the students get one-on-one client contact or contact with those at the who are using the practicum. The third is we also have to do some group work. Um, there's also documentation and administrative work, so learning how to, file like claims and do some daily like writing. And then the final one is we have to participate in a type of creative assignment.
Okay, and what about like the days?
Pardon?
Did you
What about the days of the
Yeah.
week, or
Okay.
are you coming in every day, or?
The way it works is I'd either come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it's about 7 hours a day,
Okay.
so 21 hours a week until starting the second week of September.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the fall, it starts the first week of January until the end of the semester.
Okay. And supervision. So your supervision, can you tell me like what are you looking for like during your supervision?
What I'm looking for in supervision is having someone who I can talk to about if I have any issues or if I'm unsure about how to handle something. I can kind of seek that advisement from them, and also, helping me learn and grow in areas I may not be as comfortable with at the moment.
Okay, so what are okay, so what strength do you have that would be relevant to the work setting that you're interested in?
I think one of my strengths is I'm very creative. I tend to take every situation as an opportunity to try and find an alternative solution to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also tend to like see like whenever there's a situation where there's two sides to it, I tend to like be unbiased and take in the information I have before making an assessment. And I also tend to see beauty in what others do and what others see. I try to, as much as I can, make a strength-based approach as to seeing like what they're good at rather than focusing on what a problem may be.
That's good. So can you give me an example of one of your strengths?
Yeah, sure. So, and I tell this story because I've gotten permission to tell this from the individuals who are involved. I used to work at Stone's Throw, which is just a local coffee joint, and one of the individuals she was more focused. She was better at creating than the counting part, which I relate to. So I found the problem was she was having a bit of difficulty getting the numbers in her head. So I saw, well, I know you're very creative and you're very visual, so we made a little sign so she could see like what each currency was and see a visual representation, which made it easier for her to do like cashier work.
So I think, can you tell me a little bit more about what interests you specifically? You mentioned about the creativity and the art aspect of the program, but what is it why do you want to feel practicum at this place?
So I want a practicum at this place because part of the mission statement is essentially to help create activists and help them engage in society's problems and help them understand that so they can be the leaders of tomorrow. I think that's really important, and I think we do need to help support kids in in getting to a position where they can be a leader and where they can build that resilience against issues they may come across.
Okay.
You're doing good.
So I'm just taking a look at your resume, and I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about your experiences and just how you think it might apply, and what you mentioned a little bit about Stone's Throw Coffee. I'm wondering if any of your other experiences, have you worked with youth in the past, and can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Discord is a social media platform in which you can create little servers and engage with multiple people at once. In that specific scenario, I was representing an influencer who happened to have a younger fan base of around 13 to 16. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm interacting with them. And sometimes it's as simple as, good luck with school, and remember, please don't stay up and do your homework. And also just giving them that kind of environment where they can flourish and feel like they belong to something and they have a community that's ready to support them.
Thank you.
Yep.
So under the Child and Family Services Act, you must have heard about this. There's a duty to report. Can you tell me what this means and how it applied to you as a student in your practicum?
Right. So in Section 72, there's the duty to report, which basically means if I suspect any child or youth is in danger or not getting sufficient care from the person who's in charge, it is my duty to report if I suspect anything like abuse, neglect, physical, sexual, emotional. And that affects me because if I suspect there's an individual I'm working with who's not receiving, it's my duty to go to my supervisor first, especially as a student, and tell them and make sure they know, because you have to, even if you're not sure if it's correct, it's not my place to place like a firm judgment or be the detective. It's my duty to say, I suspect this is happening, this needs to be further looked into.
Okay. And is it your supervisor that you're reporting to? Who do you actually have that duty to report to?
You do have to support, legally you have to report to, especially if you're the one being told, to Child Aid Services. But it is my understanding from what I've learned and observed in my classroom experience that, especially as a student where you're still learning, you report to a supervisor only because they have a little more knowledge in making sure you're not reporting over, he got a mosquito bite, that's neglect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So best practice,
Yeah.
for sure. Okay.
But then again, you made a good point, because normally we sometimes as a client will report something to another staff and they already reported to children lead as well.
Right.
But it's still even if you tell your supervisor and you want her to guide you during that phone call, you have to be the one to make the call.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in your practicum, you may be involved with youth who are not maybe so happy with you at the time. There may be some conflict that you're dealing with, and I want to know if you feel ready for that and how you faced conflict in the past. So has there been a time that you've had a conflict with somebody at work or school or with the youth that you've worked with, perhaps as the moderator? How have you resolved that conflict in the past?
When you work with at Stone's Throw, which is a coffee place, usually the saying "Don't talk to me before my coffee" tends to be true. There was an individual, and he asked for coffee, and he was upset with the temperature, and his response was to take it and dump it on my station and splash on me, and I was. Although I was frustrated, I stayed calm and I said, "Sir, I'm sorry you've had this experience. However, that's inappropriate. You cannot treat customers or staff like that. I need to ask you to leave." Because in that situation, I didn't feel like it was going to be resolved in a peaceful manner. I felt he was too agitated to be in a mind space to talk with me, especially. So I just did my best to diffuse the situation and make sure everyone stays safe, especially the fellow patrons.
Okay, so like in the placement that you're applying for, so like if it's something like that happened, what would you do?
If a kid was frustrated and upset with me, I would probably try to my first thing would be to try and find a quieter area so I don't embarrass them in front of fellow peers or elsewhere. I'd be like, that's not appropriate, and then I'd talk with them, because usually when they act out, they might just need someone to talk to, so I'd try to figure out, is there something going on specifically that's happened to to cause this reaction.
Sorry if you see my forehead a little bit. I'm just writing
It's
down
okay.
some
It's beautiful.
notes. Okay. I was thought of something, and that train of thought has poofed, has disappeared. So there was something that crossed my mind that was related that I had wanted to. I'll come back to it.
Okay.
So I'll just go to the next question here. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to teamwork and how you work in a team setting, for example, group projects?
Right. So my approach to teamwork is, although there may be one leader, everyone has expertise and everyone has their own background that makes them a leader in that section. And so my approach is always to find what's someone's strengths and how can we utilize it to the best ability possible. So whenever I sit down with a group, my first inclination is to go around, what's your name, what's your strengths, and how do you prefer to get feedback? Because I also think that's important. A part of communication and learning how to communicate with each other makes a successful team. So that's my approach to teamwork. It's never just one person in charge and everyone's a servant. Everyone has their own times to be leaders, and everyone has their own times to be a follower.
Okay, so what if one of your teamwork can't, the member of the team can't hold their end of the work? What would you do?
So if one member of the team is having difficulties with the work, we'd have a talk about trying to find a compromise in order to make it easier for them to manage without making it more difficult for others to manage. So maybe it's, if you can't handle the amount of work, maybe we can divvy it up into smaller sections, or is there something else that interests you or that you feel you could do? So kind of swap jobs.
Okay.
So I did remember my train of thought from earlier. We were talking about conflict and the stressful situation that you encountered. And I was wondering what you do to help manage stress. So in that environment, you expressed how you handle it in the moment, but what do you do after the fact to ensure that you're taking care of your own mental health and your own stress levels? Because in this environment, working with vulnerable youth, you will be exposed to occasions where it will be stressful, and it does add up. So what do you do to take care of yourself and to prevent that stress from becoming too much?
So in terms of self-care, one thing I do is I do keep a journal to myself so I can kind of reflect, write down, and kind of put it into perspective rather than just bubbling up in the moment. If it's in a moment where I cannot leave and what I tend to do is just step back, take a breath, and be like, how else can I look at this? Like, because often you find your feelings can cause you to feel either anger or frustration or strength, or stress, not strength, although they can do that too. So if I'm ever in a situation like that, I recognize sometimes it's okay to take a step back to kind of recollect my thoughts. Deep breathing is one I do too, and I have this technique where I clench up and then shake it off, get rid of it, leave that energy behind, so I can get back into the moment and not focus on the past.
And how would a Sheridan faculty member describe you as a student?
I think Sheridan faculty would describe me as engaged and with a willingness to learn. I like to sit at the front of class. I like to ask questions, and even though it's a 2-hour transit from home to Oakville, I always do my best to arrive on time, ready for today's assignment, focusing on the task at hand.
Did you have any more questions about if you had a chance to look at that?
Yeah. But I know like one thing that they will probably ask you too is like, well, after the interviews, because I think the interviews done. We just
For the most part,
yeah.
we can just, if there's anything else that, but
Yeah.
for the most part, the set interview questions are
Okay.
done, so we can just have a bit of back and forth dialogue.
So like normally they will ask you like, do you have like a days in mind that you want to do practicum on, like your hours and everything?
Especially in a community setting, they
Yeah.
will probably give you the option of days versus afternoons.
Right.
And if you have an availability in mind, that's something to keep in mind for
Okay.
sure. And at the end of an interview, they'll typically ask, do you have any questions
Right.
for us? And I don't know if you have any prepared.
I
or-
do
Okay.
have some.
Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, I do. What does a child and youth care practitioner do typically at this placement?
Okay. And we could answer that. We could take our best guess, but we don't have the
Right.
factual information. But that is a good question.
And then my other would be in a situation when I have to deal with the youth. What are your expectations, or how would you expect someone to react with the youth like that? On that question. The question where it was like, what would I do with a youth who is frustrated or sorry?
Okay, so that's actually good that you brought that up, because I wanted to elaborate a little bit more, just providing feedback on that question. And I know it's partly because this is your first practicum, so you may not have experienced this yet. So it is something that we can give you our thoughts on for sure. So as far as the interview goes, I think that's over. We don't have to keep recording if
I have to record
Oh,
for
you have to
feedback
record the
too.
feedback as well?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't as a
Thank you
student.
so much for your time.
Okay.
So
Because I
go
think we
ahead.
have to go over the feedback together first.
Yes,
And then
I think
we
there's a couple things that we want to discuss first,
Yeah.
and then we can call you back in.
Okay. Okay.
that works.
Okay.
So how do you think you did?
Wow, first time you're asking me that. I think one of my problems was I said a lot, and when answering a question, my tone went up rather than down to finish it, which is nerves.
Honestly,
I didn't notice that.
honestly, so everybody comes into an interview and is nervous. So as you did present as slightly nervous, but overall your the wording that you used, very occasionally you said but overall the way that you spoke was very
Confident and
confident, and we didn't have any concerns with that at all.
Okay.
So is there anything else that you noticed about yourself, or that you feel, or how do you think your answers went?
Situation, action, response stuff I struggle with because we just kind of learned about it. So I know that's a weakness of mine. Okay.
What did you do to prepare for this interview?
I asked myself, I had my mom sit me down and she read the sheet. We had to do interview question
So
sheets.
you got one of these, or
Something similar to that. And I had her sit me down and answer, and I was always thinking about like what's an example of an SAR where I used a strength, what's an example when I had to be in a team, like trying to think of like what I thought would come up often.
And like Is there anything else you noticed?
I don't know. I just feel I'm okay if I didn't do okay here because I'd rather fail here and learn from it than say you guys, for example, not that you guys are, but like you guys say, yeah, that was good, and then go and realize, oh,
Yeah,
shit.
I know, because that's the real world out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go over
Okay.
the resume with you. I think it needs to be a little bit more consistent. So like,
Okay.
you use bulletin points here. You should use it the same coming down.
Okay.
And it's too long.
Okay.
So it needs to normally be on one page. So maybe like when you remove certain stuff like
There's a lot of space, so there's
Yeah.
a little bit of blank space, and when you format it, you can take a look at different templates. And I had to spend hours looking at different templates based on what I visually liked. But you'll find that you can get rid of some of the space and put everything onto, if possible, you should be able to, one page.
Okay.
And I think what we noticed was this one you didn't really mention as much at all, actually. So
Yeah.
and it, since it's also a little while ago, you don't really need to include it. You can tailor your resume based on the application.
yeah,
So
like what you're applying for on your position.
I included the rogue chef because one of my references is from there, so
Okay.
I thought it wouldn't
So then-
be weird to.
so then it would be, then it could be relevant, or you could try to find a different reference based
Okay.
on what you choose to include that could speak to your experiences and how you would work with youth. Right?
Okay.
So it's just something to think about in formatting, because this is a lot to flip through, especially we couldn't get through it all before we started the interview.
Okay.
So just to have minimal pages if possible.
And don't staple your resume.
Okay.
Yeah, he's supposed to use like a pin.
Okay.
what was that?
Paperclip.
Paper cut. Okay.
Because like sometimes you want to like lay it out
Right.
instead of like having
Which
to flip
also
them.
helps if it's just less pages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Solve that problem.
It's like it's okay for me like two, like
Yeah,
but
2
mostly
plus
one.
reference?
So
Yeah. No, because the reference page is a complete different thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So honestly, especially because you are still a student,
Mhm.
when you're going to practicum, they are not looking for a long resume.
Okay.
If you've been in the field for a while, then that's when they expect more work experience. But right now, they don't expect you to have that work experience. So you don't have to fill it up and kind of add in filler stuff.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
can just put the most relevant, and they'll be okay with that.
Okay.
They're not expecting you to have 10 years of work experience
Right.
as a student. And then the last thing for the cover letter that I wanted to speak to, I don't know if you have anything else, but really sell yourself a bit more in this cover letter. I noticed you have a university experience that's musical performance, which is very much related to
Okay.
the practicum environment, creativity, arts, and you could speak to that and being more specific, because you say you have the creativity and artistic skills, but being specific and adding your personal experiences and your background into this would really help, rather
Okay.
than just a generic. Okay, you can keep these if you want with some of our comments on it, and then I don't know
That
if
would
there's
be
anything
Yeah, I
else you
just
had.
have one more thing. Like for here,
Mm.
it should be the same as
Oh,
front,
okay.
just your
Consistency.
name, the same
Okay.
format. I think that's it.
Okay.
So, as for, and the reference letter, I like that you included one.
Mhm.
It's not a requirement for sure. You can be fine with just the references.
Reference.
But the informality here, just by calling you Liv, is
Yeah.
a little bit
Personal.
just yes, it's a little
Okay.
bit too personal for. It's great that they had that rapport with you,
Right.
but just going by your full name and that consistency.
Okay.
In that.
I will grade him on that.
Yeah.
As for the actual interview, to be honest, I think that you did really well.
Okay.
We both agreed on that, and it's interesting that some of the things that you felt you were not so good at, that you mentioned at the beginning, it seems like you prepared yourself because of that, and
Mhm.
those were the things that we actually pointed out, and we said you did really well.
Yeah.
You spoke very well, and the situation action results were clearly prepared.
Okay.
So it very, very clear that you had a situation, action, result, and it was you were very confident when you answered those questions. They could perhaps be a little bit more relevant to youth, but that's you don't have necessarily the experience. I don't know. So what you did was perfect.
Okay.
As a student, that's what they would look for.
Okay.
And also like the scenario regarding the youth aggress against you, like normally you don't want to put yourself in danger,
Right.
right? So like taking that youth from the environment that he's in and taking him separately to talk to him, that's not a good approach, because sometimes they may aggress at you, they may punch you, depends on the level of behavioral they have at that agency as well. So maybe you can like, and there is limitation of what you can do too as a student.
Right.
So just being mindful of that with the isolating piece. Be careful with that. You never want to isolate yourself, especially as a student.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know you didn't specifically say I would go and be alone, but it was kind of the impression. And I understand the thought behind it, to have him isolated from him or her or them from the environment that might be causing them stress, but just being mindful and
especially if they're angry at you too.
Okay.
Yes.
So like if it's something with a different youth, like both of them, maybe you can say, hey Tom, let's talk about it over here, right? Just to try to get him away from it. But if it's regarding you,
Okay.
you don't wanna.
If in doubt, you can, especially as a student, they love when you say, I would seek supervision as to how best to resolve the situation, because they want that back and forth, right?
Okay.
So never, if you don't know the answer, I would seek supervision, but this is what I would do. This is based on my knowledge. This is what I would do, but I would always seek supervision. Let's see. So the selling yourself. So that was something I mentioned. Oh, yes. So that was something I mentioned with the cover letter, but it was also noticed just in your responses. So the way you speak is very confident and you answer the questions, but the content of your answers could sell yourself a little bit more.
Okay.
So your self-awareness, that's where the strengths area, because you have clearly, you have a lot of strengths. You have the passion, very clear that you like the art and that you like the activism piece and you really want to connect the two.
And you went to university too to perform.
Sell that.
Okay.
Sell that.
Okay.
You're a college student right now, but you already have a university degree. That's
Okay.
right. So that's something that they would definitely sell yourself. So those two questions. So tell us about yourself was a little bit weak. You really want to have a nice elevator pitch package, really sell yourself. And then the strengths question. So what strengths do you have that would be relevant? A little bit more CYC specific and just sell yourself.
Okay.
That's all I can say.
Yeah, use a little bit more CYC language too.
Okay.
So like they love to hear inclusion, they love to hear
And you spoke to some of that, like with your group work. I loved your approach to teamwork, but using some of those strengths that you do have in working with others and being able to articulate that is a growth area for you.
Okay.
Your questions to the agency were pretty good. Knowledge.
yeah, especially that question when you ask like if there's
That's 15 minutes over. So. Did you throw all the questions?
yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we did.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say here's your feedback. If you have any questions, you can find me in the comments. I'm just giving you that and kicking out so you don't go right into your lunch.
Thank you.
No problem.
We're
Do you have
wrapping up.
Yeah.
a phone?
Yeah.
Yes. We have a clock right there that's staring at us.
It's okay. I just want you to make sure you get lunch. I put 2 breaks in for people like you that take after me.
Yes, I was thinking that.
Olivia's
I
charming.
didn't want to say it.
I know I am.
Isn't she charming?
Yeah, she is.
I know. Look at the smiles. Would you hire her?
Yes.
Because you can't grill her for that long and then not hire her. Okay.
Yes,
We will. But appearance.
Besides that, you're making Helen really nervous over here.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so like your appearance. It's good, everything. But I don't even know like
So as being female, we've
Yeah.
all had this. We've all had this. So
Yeah.
depending on what you wear, like honestly, right now you're fine, very professional. But it's just on occasion I've had the problem where like the material's too thin and if it's cold,
Shoot.
right?
Okay.
So So that's just something to be mindful of and to check, just check before you in a mirror before you wear it to an interview.
Okay.
When you're sitting down, everything is fine and like it's very professional. It seems to be a professional dress.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I don't need to
Yeah.
speak more
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, just make sure it's not too tense.
Okay.
But you're good. You're hired.
Yes,
Okay, start on
would hire
Monday.
would hire you. So, do we give you this?
Yeah.
Assume if you, yeah, because it's good reflection material
Okay.
for.
EL. Right?
Yeah, ELENA.
I can leave you to fill out the date and the agency.
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add.
No, I think it's good. We went over this.
And you
stuff,
have our
okay?
recording here. of
Yeah.
Everything we're speaking of.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. All
Okay.
the best.
good luck.
Thank you.